In true Bitcoin Park fashion, we're starting in the middle of the announcement. Yeah, should we full send it, man? We're live here with Bitcoin Park. We're talking to the Econo Alchemist. I'm not in a closet. I am in a room in an actual Bitcoin hacker space, the Atlanta BitLab, which is, if you ever get the chance to go to the Atlanta BitLab, it is cool. Talk to Steven, get connected. He manages the space. Really, really, really cool stuff they have going on. The community is cool here. The neighborhood is cool. It's like this beautiful old Fourth Ward neighborhood that they have. I don't know if you've ever been out there, but
hmm
it's gorgeous. Highly
I've
recommend.
I've only been to Atlanta once, and it was sometime in the early '90s when the Olympics were happening there. I think so. Yeah, I
Were
had
you
a
competing?
yes, I was. Yeah, yep, got a bronze. Not my best performance.
What's your event?
It was breakdancing, actually. That was the first.
Incredible.
Yeah, that was the first time breakdancing was in the Olympics, and after what we saw last year, man, I'm just so disappointed in what's happened in that space
Your
since then.
industry has really slipped, but this is why I'm glad to be talking to you today about something far more interesting than the Olympics,
Yes.
which is the upcoming Texas Energy and Mining Summit that we're going to be having May 6th and May 7th at Bitcoin Park Austin, formerly the Commons.
Yep.
However, what a lot of people may not know is that leading up to TEMS, the Texas Energy and Mining Summit, we're having a special event the day before.
hmm
And you, in particular, are going to be helping us make that happen. Can
Yep.
you introduce yourself and then introduce what this event is?
Yep. So I'm Econo Alchemist. I have published some words that people like. And since writing and becoming popular for my writing, I have co-found the 256 Foundation, and I do the Pod 256 podcast, which is a product of the foundation. I do that every week. So, I feel like I'm preaching to the choir because you do the podcast with me. So this is, but I
Okay,
guess
tell me more about that podcast. It sounds incredible.
yeah, no, I guess for the people listening who may not know me, I've published a lot of technical guides with Bitcoin Magazine, the Brains Mining blog. I did the newsletter for Upstream Data for a year. I've given a number of conference presentations from Guns and Bitcoin to the Bitcoin Magazine conferences to Beef
Hmm.
Initiative summits. I've been all over the place talking to all kinds of people about Bitcoin, censorship resistance, self custody, and mining. And I think I'm probably most popular for my guide that I published in January of 2021, which explained how to mine Bitcoin at home.
Amazing.
Um, and so, yeah, it's been a wild ride. I've been into Bitcoin since about the end of 2018. And in February of 2024, we had this idea that uh, Bitcoin mining was on a dangerous trajectory, and the decentralization and the importance around decentralizing Bitcoin mining has been a very hot topic recently. So a lot of people are aware of that. But if you go a little bit deeper, another underlying issue in the mining ecosystem is how the technology, the hardware, and the firmware are closed proprietary solutions that people have been trying to build this global monetary network on. So my co-founder Rod from Bitcoin Park and I thought that was uh, we thought that was bullshit, and we wanted to be the change that we wanted to see in the world. So we founded the 256 Foundation with the mission to dismantle the proprietary mining empire. And basically it was just kind of a meme because
Yeah.
there was really no such thing as open source Bitcoin mining up until Scott instigated the BitAxe project. And so that one simple little device, which is just a single chip Bitcoin miner, that really kind of opened the door. And the 256 Foundation stuck its foot in that door, and now we've pressed our way in. And a couple months ago, we had our first fundraiser
Mm-hmm.
here in Nashville, and because this foundation is focused specifically on Bitcoin mining, we thought it would be cool to have supporters point hash rate to us with their Bitcoin miners instead of just giving us cash, right? Or sending us Bitcoin. And uh, we set up our own Stratum server using a FutureBit Apollo, and we had our supporters point their miners to that. And at one point, we had more than one exahash, and we ended up solo mining block, and the foundation got the block reward. And so at
What
the
number was that block? Do you know it offhand?
yeah, 881423.
881423. So immortalized in the blockchain is a
Yep,
future bit Apollo at 881423,
yep,
where it's our block. We hit it live on air.
yep. And if you look at the Coinbase transaction on that, it says the 256 Foundation. So
So you've been in this mining space. You have been doing the home mining setup, the privacy mining setup. Now we've done the first telehash, so we've hit a block live on air.
mhm.
What is coming for the next one? How can we improve on what we have already done?
Yeah, so the next telehash, so the overall goal is to raise money for the developers who are working on dismantling the proprietary mining empire. So, at a high level, what's going to make it better than the last one is raising more money. So we found one block at the first telehash. I think what would make the next telehash better is if we found two blocks and got the funding we needed to keep these projects going.
Mm-hmm.
So, the foundation identified four critical areas that we wanted to attack to fulfill our mission. And it was standardizing and open sourcing hashboards,
Mm-hmm.
open sourcing a control board, open sourcing firmware, and open sourcing a pool application. And there was actually a fifth one that we didn't quite have enough money to fund this cycle. So, maybe after our second fundraiser, if there's enough money in the coffers to
Yeah.
fund that fifth project, we'll go after that too. The fifth one was just going to be like a kind of like a blockchain insights dashboard built
Yeah.
into
Block Watcher.
built into the operating system that we're developing now.
So
So yeah, the whole
if I could
stack, the whole mining stack.
hit on something before we start to dive into those projects, because I want to hear more about them and I want to hear how we're going to celebrate these people at the upcoming telehash. There's there's something that I think people don't appreciate enough. And Jungli Kopreet
Mm-hmm.
mentioned it when we had our recent podcast with him, this idea that actually, no, it wasn't him, it was Ryan. Ryan mentioned this when we were talking to him earlier, was this idea that so much is built on a system like Linux,
Right.
but Linux is open source. And so
Mm-hmm.
if folks are absolutely massive competitors in the public market, they will still fund Linux development because it allows for an open source ecosystem to kind of spring from it, right? You
Right.
can do your closed source stuff, but you're going to fund the root of the tree is what you want to water, so to speak, if we can be metaphorical. I don't
Yeah.
think
I
enough
mean,
people appreciate what we're doing and how this works in the mining space. Could you explain why the ecosystem being closed source is so bad for developments and innovation and the creation of new kinds of mining deployments, Can you tell us exactly, help us understand what the problem is in being so closed source and how us open sourcing will help?
Yeah, sure. I mean, just going back to your comparison there, I mean, Microsoft is a supporter of the Linux Foundation, for example. And you would think that Microsoft would view the Linux Foundation as a competitor, and that they would not want to try and support them. You would think they would do everything in their power to to make them uh, suffer, not
Hmm.
support them. So it's a little counterintuitive, but really open source is where all the innovation happens. So open source ensures that anyone has access to the source code and the source files for the technology that they're trying to interact with. And when you have that, open source ensures that you can modify it freely. You can change it to do things a little bit differently than it does by default. And if you have an idea for something, you can just sit down in your garage on the weekend and start making changes to these open source solutions and playing out your ideas and developing something new. And that's where innovation happens.
Yeah.
So like when systems are closed and proprietary, so we'll turn to Bitcoin mining specifically. So just look at like Bitmain. They have, I don't know, nobody knows exactly, but I think it's a fair estimate to say Bitmain controls like 90% of the Bitcoin mining market. So the they're in control of manufacturing the chips, the ASICs themselves, the hash boards that those go on, the enclosures that those go in, the firmware that's running on those boxes, and it's all closed, and the like wire connections for the fans and between the control board and the hash boards, it's all proprietary. So nobody really gets a say in any single parameter when it comes to the ant miners. So, like, let's say you're trying to deploy a fleet of Bitcoin miners, and you notice something about them that is causing inefficiencies in your operation. You do not have the freedom to make changes or to modify the hardware, the firmware, or anything about these miners. You're stuck with what the manufacturer gave you, and you have to change everything else in your environment to fit around that.
And it
So
doesn't
that,
matter how big you are. It could be 5 machines, it could be 50,000 machines.
right,
It's always closed. I always just have to deal with what I'm given, basically.
right. And so, particularly with Bitmain, um, there's been a number of issues where the um, ethics or the credibility or for lack of a better term, the trustworthiness of Bitmain has come into question because they've done things like covert ASIC boost, amp bleed.
Can you explain that for folks who may not have been around back then, what covert
Yeah.
ASIC boost and amp lead were?
And so, like, I wasn't around back then either. So my understanding of these issues is very surface level. ASIC boost made it so that they were able to find blocks faster, from what I understand. Like they could like minimize the space that they could like find knots in. So like they were able to um, for the power going in, they were essentially able to like get more hashes out.
Yeah. And this was something they designed. As I understand, I chatted with Jan Kapik, who was one of the original folks who either founded or sort of co-founded in the firmware. But this was something that was only discovered, as I understand, because when people were going in and starting to reverse engineer the early Antminer machines so that they could write firmware for them, this third-party firmware, it would have been the Brains firmware through Slushpool at the time. They found that there was essentially a settings bank that was not public, that
Mm-hmm.
there was another additional efficiency that you could have running this thing called ASIC boost that was covert that would allow you to hash more efficiently. And this is sort of like if you take F1 as an example and you're racing against the VW team, but you're also buying your engines from VW. If you were to find out that in VW's version and your version, they had an extra gear, but when they shipped the version to you, there was like a metal plate so that you could never shift into that gear.
Right.
So this
Yeah.
is something that was totally hidden from the end consumer, but was used, we assume, right? We don't know, by Bitmain.
Yeah, because they were mining themselves, right? So they're able to increase their competitive advantage because everybody's using their software, but or using their Bitcoin miners, which has their software on it. Everybody's using those and using them in a way that's less efficient than the way they could themselves use it.
That's right.
And then amp amp lead basically was like something in the back end that was like pinging their centralized server. So like every Bitmain miner was like communicating back to Bitmain in some capacity, and it's not entirely clear like what was being communicated or like what kinds of permissions they had. Like, could they just remotely stop the miner from hashing? There were a number of concerns
Yeah.
about what a communication link like that could do.
Can they take half a terahash?
Right? Could they snipe hash rate? Um, and then another concern that just came up the other day, or another issue that just came up. So Bitmain just released the firmware for the S21 Plus, I believe it was, and there's something in that firmware that doesn't allow it to connect to a number of Bitcoin mining pools. But there's no problem with it connecting to Ampool, for example. So, whether that was a mistake or, intentional, I don't think we'll ever get the full story from Bitmain themselves. So we're just left to
Yeah.
speculate. But, given their track history and the way that they have tried to stifle innovation by coming out with new hardware that doesn't even have a slot for a SD microchip, so you can't like change the firmware at all. Um, they're they have they've done everything in their power to stifle innovation. Nothing they do is open source. You can't see the documentation on any of it. It's very difficult to change things, and they actively work to make it more difficult to change things as time has gone on. And on top of that, like they have a complete monopoly, and they've done very sketchy things that a company with a monopoly like that is able to do. So yeah, not a big fan of Bitmain and what's happened. And it's if you take a step back, it's like the Bitcoin protocol itself is open source. Um,
Mm-hmm.
And like the Scott likes to point out often that in Satoshi Nakamoto's first post about the Bitcoin white paper, he said, "I've developed an open source peer-to-peer electronic cash solution," and open source was like there from the very beginning. So the protocol itself is open. The vast majority of applications built on top of that protocol are open source. Your From your mobile wallets to desktop wallets to hardware wallets to other apps that exist for Bitcoin and interacting with Bitcoin.
Mm-hmm.
But for some reason, when it comes to mining, generally Bitcoiners have just accepted this closed source and proprietary solution from Bitmain. And it's just kind of been propagated, and the can has been kicked down the road over and over again. And, nothing was really changing until Scott reverse engineered the Bitmain ASIC chip and built the BitAxe with it. And so the foundation is trying to leverage what Scott started with the BitAxe and apply that across the entire mining stack with our 4 projects and change the
Yeah, tell
trajectory.
us about those projects. You mentioned that there's 4 particular areas of focus. Help me understand why these are the areas of focus that we are going to be starting with, because at the
Mm-hmm.
telehash coming up on the 5th, as I understand, we're going to be getting more of a deep dive. We're going to be getting to meet these developers and hear more about the kind of work that they're doing. Can you give us the high level of, what are these 4 projects and what are the important roles that they are going to serve in dismantling this proprietary mining empire?
Yeah, so all 4 developers are going to be in Austin for the telehash and for Thames. And so we're going to highlight each of them during Thames. So they'll be up there on stage with us to discuss their projects. So anyone listening to this, you're encouraged to meet them and greet them and ask them questions and learn about what they're working on. So basically, we wanted to open source the entire um, Bitcoin mining stack, and when we broke that down, we identified the 4 areas. So first is the hash board. Our hash board project is called Ember One. Scott from the BitAxe project is the lead developer on the Ember One, and it's a 100-watt standardized hash board. The first version has the Bitmain chips on it. It has 12 of those chips. And when I say standardized, you know, Bitmain's data connection, for example, to their hash boards, it's a proprietary connector. You can't just like connect it with anything you would have available laying around your house. So we went with USB-C. So when you want to get data to the Ember One hashboard, you can do that with the USB-C connection now, which means technically you could like run the firmware on your laptop and communicate with the hashboard from your laptop. You still need to have a power supply to power the board, but yeah, we're just trying to open that up. So
Yeah.
So that has the communication has been standardized. All the components used minus the ASIC chips themselves are like available from large distributors like DigiKey. The form factor, we went with 128 millimeter by 128 millimeter. And we're on our roadmap, we have several different series of these Ember One hash boards that are going to be coming down the pike. So the first one, like I said, is the Bitmain chips. Next, we're going to be working on one with the Intel BZM2 ASIC chips. Then we're going to be working on one with the Auradine chips. And then eventually, once they're released, we'll be working on a version with the block chips. But all of these boards are going to have the same form factor. So like, imagine you've got your enclosure and your fan, and you've got like 5 or 10 of these boards running in there. And a year later, there's a version that comes out with the block ASIC chips, and it's much more efficient.
Yeah.
And you want to upgrade to that. You can keep your enclosure, you can keep your fans, you can keep the control board, you can keep the connectors. Everything stays the same. You just slide out the old hash board and then slide in the new hash board, and it's the same footprint.
Now, as far as that hash board is concerned, you mentioned having to reverse engineer the Bitmain chips. Is this always going to be the case where you're going to have to reverse engineer a chip to put it on the board, or can this be made easier?
Yeah, that's a good question. So, Scott reverse engineered the Bitmain chips for when he was building the BitAxe, and he's had to do a very similar process with the Ember One. He was able to apply a lot of the lessons he learned from the BitAxe, but this is there's not a BitAxe with the specific Bitmain chip that we're using,
Hmm.
so there were still things to be discovered there. Um, Bitmain doesn't want to work with anybody, so um, it's it's in our best interest to find chip suppliers who want to work with builders and innovators. So we're figuring out who those people are.
Hmm.
Um, you know, Block has been very supportive, and they've said from day one that they want everything they do to be open source, and they've spun their mining operation into proto mining now. So I'll refer to them as Proto from here on out, but just know that that's Block's like subsidiary or Proto came from Block.
For sure.
Um, so yeah, Proto is I don't know what they're going to be able to open source or to what extent what they produce is going to be open source, but they have made it clear that they have a commitment to open sourcing things. So I anticipate that they're going to be the relationship with them as it relates to building things around their chips is going to be much different than the relationship with Bitmain, which
Amazing.
is, you know, like non-existent.
So it's a deepening of relationships, it sounds like, and it's an incremental function. You start with one, you prove it, the next one comes out. You mentioned, and we're coming to the end of our time here, unfortunately. But you mentioned, so one of the four, the Ember One board. Do do you have time? Can you run us through what the other three projects are for folks who are curious on what they get to see in the upcoming telehash?
Yeah, and I'll try and keep it quick. I didn't know we were on a time limit. Sorry. Uh, the second project is the Mujina firmware. So that's going to be at first it's going to be the mining application, uh, but eventually it's going to develop into a complete Linux OS that you'll be able to flash onto the control board. You'll be able to run it on a range of hardware, but we're specifically designing it for our control board at first. Um, so yeah, the neat thing about the Mujina firmware is that we're trying to build it in a way that different drivers for different chips can just be ported into it.
Hmm.
And the reason we're doing that is because we're going to have several different series of Ember One hash boards. So like I said, Bitmain, Intel, Auradine, Block. So we're going to need at least 4 different drivers that can plug into that firmware to work with whatever control board the user has.
Wow.
Um, and yeah, it's going to be Linux based. Ryan, the lead developer there, is building everything in Rust. So I think people are going to be really excited about the firmware that we have. And that's going to open up a range of capabilities for anyone running that firmware to control every parameter of their miner. Whereas right now, even if you use a third market firmware, it's still closed source. There's no open source firmware that exists on the market right now.
Hmm. That's right.
Well, with the exception of AxeOS for the BitAxe project. Um, but it's not like you can flash that onto your Antminer.
That's right.
So eventually we do want to have versions of Mujina that you could flash onto your Antminer and other mining hardware, but one step at a time. Then there's the control board. We're calling that Libre board. That's being built based on a Raspberry Pi I/O board, which again standardized is kind of at the core of our design decisions here. That I/O board has two 100 pin connectors on it so that you can put like a Raspberry Pi compute module, and that type of connection is standardized across the industry. So if users don't like Raspberry Pi and they want some other x86 compute module, they can go buy whatever they prefer and put that on there, or even RISC-V if they want to put that on there. And so you can scale that up with you can get higher amounts of RAM on those compute modules.
Oh, wow.
So our control board is going to have a range of different connectors on it. It'll have the Raspberry Pi 40-pin header. It'll have a touchscreen display port. It'll have HDMI connector. It's going to have an NVMe port, so you can hook like a 2 terabyte hard drive into it, and then download the entire Bitcoin blockchain and have your Bitcoin node running on the control board with the Mujina firmware. And then that brings us to our last project, which is HydroPool. So that'll be like the Stratum server application running. And that will be able to use the node that's also running locally on your control board to fetch work, give that work to the miner, to the hash boards, and pass that information back and forth. And so, we want to have Stratum v2 implemented in both the pool and the firmware. There's just a lot of exciting developments happening there, and we really foresee this being a huge unlock for heat reuse applications, for opening up Bitcoin mining to be innovated on in a number of different ways.
This is huge. So we've got a couple of weeks until we hit May 5th, the day of the telehash in Austin, Texas, followed by the Texas Energy and Mining Summit, which is going to be our first time running this summit that's been running out of Nashville for years at this point in Texas. We'll see if everything really is bigger in Texas.
Yeah, we'll see.
We'll see if the Texas boys and girls show up. Super excited for it. Do you have any final thoughts, words, considerations for folks leading into this upcoming telehash?
Yeah, I mean, if you're into Bitcoin mining, it's in your own best interest to see free and open source solutions proliferate. So you should consider supporting the 256 Foundation. Go to 256foundation.org to learn more. Our 4 projects are intended to be long-term support initiatives. It's not like we're just going to walk away from these after the 6-month grant period is up. All 4 of these projects are currently in development, and we're trying to figure out how to raise the money to keep them going after this initial 6-month cycle. So just like Microsoft supports the Linux Foundation, if you're into Bitcoin mining, you should really consider supporting free and open source Bitcoin mining solutions.
Well said, man. Well, I can't wait for it. I'm really excited to be out there and see how it is. I do have to say, before we cut the stream, thank you to the Atlanta BitLab, which I'm currently out of. If you can tell, I'm not in a closet, and this is not my normal background, but had the chance to, while I'm in Atlanta for a couple of days, connect with the folks here. There's a cool scene in Atlanta and Econo. There's some miners out here, and I think we got to get them to Nashville. We got to get them to Austin to come see the park.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I've heard that there's some good dudes down there.
Amazing, and it's not too hot, which is the next best thing. Well, man, thank you. We can cut it there. I just want to say thank you for jumping on with me, and we're super excited to have this telehash, because it's worlds apart from where we even started just a few months ago in terms of these initiatives and the way that they're rolling out so far. It's crazy to see this thing be memed into reality.
Yeah, that's we've surprised ourselves turning the meme into reality, and we're all gas, no brakes. So
all gas, no brakes. Well said. Well, on that sense, we'll cut it there. Okay.
Okay.
See ya.
See ya.
Man, Econ